Hello and welcome to the Osteopod. This episode is a continuation of the episode previous where I interviewed a few of my classmates who had recently graduated with me about their journey to getting into residency and what the whole process is like during your fourth year of medical school as a DO student. In this episode, I interview one other classmate of mine, Cameron Lindemann, who is in the Navy, and he will talk about his journey to getting his ENT residency out in Virginia and what it's like to go through the process as a military student. So I thought both his specialty and his choice of, going through med school on a military scholarship would be interesting. And so let's get into the interview where Cameron introduces himself and where he's from and what specialty he's going into and where he's going.
Yeah, my name's Cameron Lindemann. I grew up in Castle Rock, Colorado, born and raised, and then went to med school in Colorado as well at Rocky Vista, and then ended up matching at Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth in Virginia, in otolaryngology or ENT. So
awesome, and congrats to that.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to learn more about what the process was for you to get your residency, not only because of your specialty, I haven't talked to anyone that's gotten into ENT, but also how you did that through the military. I think that's another aspect and perspective that you add to this. So let's kind of start from the beginning of fourth year or getting ready for fourth year. Now, with you in the military, let me know how different it was, but in general, for all of us, we kind of started getting our audition rotations set up like at the end of third year. A lot of it was through VSAS. It could have been through programs, just emailing programs and stuff. Did you do audition rotations as a part of the military? And if so, how did you go about setting that up?
Yeah. So it's similar to civilian. It's just a little bit earlier. So in the military, you still have to do audition rotations, and in the military, definitely the most important part of your application is the audition rotation. So for the military, there's no VSAS. You just have to contact each program individually, and whatever branch you're in will let you know the date that they'll start accepting applications for audition rotations. So for the Navy, it was actually December 1st of third year. So almost a year and a half ago now, I had to set those up. So it was just kind of thing like I knew the application opened on December 1st. So midnight, November 30th to December 1st, I was up and I sent out the emails to the different programs to make sure I could get the one I wanted, because they, said that the audition slots were limited, and so you had to make sure you could get all the programs. And also slightly different than civilian, like there's only 3 programs in the Navy that even have ENT. So I just sent emails to all 3 of those and got an audition at all 3 of those programs. So it's kind of easier to choose where to go. You just go to all of them.
Yeah.
So you just got an email, and then a couple weeks later, they emailed you back and said, hey, yep, you're coming these dates, and then you're good to go.
I don't know if you talked to anyone else, any other applicants that were civilian in ENT as well. I'm interested in knowing how important are these, because it sounds like it's really important, especially in the military, since there's only 3 spots, to go and show what you know and who you are as a person in person. But for this regular old civilian doing ENT, would you have an opinion on how important it was to do an audition rotation, especially as a DO?
I think it would be very important. I know that the few other classmates that we have that went into ENT and civilian that I know, they were really stressed because the average ENT applicant has like 5 publications and, board scores that are pretty high. And so actually one of our classmates, he actually is taking like a postdoc year right now to do more research before he applies. So I guess the reason I'm saying that is it's extremely competitive, and usually there's, a couple hundred applicants for 3 spots in a program. So all that being said, if your application isn't as competitive as it could be, I would say it's extremely important to go on audition just to show, hey, look, I am intelligent. I can do the work. I can learn the knowledge, learn the skills, but also I'm someone you want to work with. Like, you'd want to invite me over to your house after work for a barbecue kind of thing, because that's something you can't show on an application no matter how good your scores are. So I think at least that was something that really helped me, because I mean, my scores were good enough, right, to get me in the door. But I think what really helped me match was I just fit in with the people. I liked hanging out with the residents and the staff, and they liked me, and we were able to get along, and they could see me as somebody that they would want to work with. So I think that helped me get an edge.
For sure. I totally agree with that. And I think your application gets your foot in the door, and you as a person is what seals the deal. I totally agree. I think that applies not only to DOs, but to anyone that is interested in a certain program. So let's touch on that too. And maybe you can kind of walk me through the application process once you have done your auditions and are getting ready for, signing up for interviews and going through ERAS and things like that. And I love what you say about what's important on your application, especially for a specialty that's a little bit more competitive, such as ENT. Having research, having good board scores. So yeah, walk us through what it was like. I mean, first of all, did you actually have to use ERAS, or was it was a separate entity that you had to register with, right?
Yeah, so the military match is all done through a program called MODS, MODS, and I could not tell you what it stands for. But anyway, that's what they do. And you're basically just putting in your normal applications, like, demographic information. It's kind of annoying because you can't just upload your CV. You have to type in each individual part of your CV into different boxes and whatever. I mean, very similar to ERAS, and differently than ERAS, I guess. You can kind of you have to rank 2 specialties, at least in the Navy, and then each of those 2 specialties you have to rank all the individual programs, and you kind of do that before you even interview, which is interesting. You kind of just have to put that you want to go to what specialty, so that the right people are starting to get your applications before interviews. So you can go back and change your rank list up until the deadline for submission, but before that point, you have a rank list in the middle of August, which is kind of different. So anyway, that's what you do. And then in the military, you also are supposed to do ERAS. So you just fill that out, because the military reserves the right to send you to a civilian residency if they want.
Interesting.
So yeah, so you are required to fill that out just in case you get what's called deferred to a civilian program. And you can still kind of be in that application cycle.
Okay. So meaning you rank your military options, and if you don't get one of those options, you automatically go into the ERAS pool, basically, of ranking.
Yeah. And then there's some programs that most of the applicants actually want to do civilian first. So they actually rank a civilian deferred spot ahead of all the military spots. So a good example is anesthesiology. So almost all the anesthesia applicants that I know in the military, they ranked civilian deferred first, because to do it in the military, you have to do a transitional year first, and then you do anesthesia for PGY 2 through 4. Whereas in a civilian program, you can just kind of get into a categorical anesthesia program, which is somewhat preferable. And the military is okay with that, and they understand that. So yeah, for almost all the anesthesia applicants, they just put that they want to do civilian, and then the military just sends them civilian, and then they will match in the ERAS pool, just like a normal student would.
Awesome. So as you're filling out your application, and you touched on some of the important parts of this application that people in your specialty look for, such as publications,
Yeah.
board scores. And we had to fill out personal statements. We had to do, letters of recommendation. Let's talk about
Yeah.
that for a moment. And what advice would you give upcoming, students who are interested in ENT, even whether or not they're doing it through the military? Any advice that you would give to help them get their application ready, what to put on their application, their personal statement, advice about getting letters of recommendation?
So one thing that came out in my interviews that I kind of wish I had known is, so in my interviews, they always ask me questions about like unique things on my CV. So for example, my dad is in the automotive industry, so I had a lot of things on there from working in automotive and at like Discount Tire and things like that. And all the interviewers loved that. They were just like, whoa, this is different. This is cool. Like, you know how to work on cars? And I'm like, well, yeah, a little bit. And that's like all they wanted to talk about. They didn't care about they didn't really care about the clubs I was in med school. They didn't really care about like what classes I honored in. I mean, at least I didn't bring it up in my interview. I'm sure they were like, oh, cool, he honored in some classes, So I guess that would be my advice first, is like, as you're setting up your CV, look at those things that make you more unique, almost outside of medicine, so trying to put on some of your hobbies or other work experience that you have outside of the field of medicine, because that stands out to these physicians, because that's all they see all day, every day is medicine. And they're kind of like, oh yeah, whatever, you were a interpreter and you were a scribe. Like, that's all what we deal with every day. So anyway, I think that's something I would recommend doing. Another thing would be try to get your personal statement polished as early as possible. That was something I kind of scrambled on. And no one said anything about my personal statement, but I think I probably could have done better had I started writing it sooner and try to get more clear ideas of what I wanted to present. I kind of just put like, hey, this is why I want to be an ENT. And I wrote about that, and it never really got brought up. And so what that tells me is it was good enough, but it wasn't really outstanding, so I maybe wish I would have done a little more on that. Another thing that I think I did really well is that research, just to touch on it again. That was another big topic in interviews, and even just as a part of the audition in general, is people are interested in what research and what you've done, because they're interested in what projects could potentially help their field. And so that was good. That was another bulk of what I ended up getting asked about. It's like, hey, well, what was this project? What did you find with that? How is that going to impact your practice as a physician? So that was huge, definitely.
I totally agree with all that too. And whether programs, take your personal statement, your CV into consideration, in addition to like your board scores and your letters of recommendation, the interesting things definitely give them fodder to talk about during interviews. So
yeah,
it's important to put that in.
Definitely. And the other thing, if I could, you just reminded me of something. I think letters of recommendation are also super important.
Yeah.
Something that I did that I was definitely nervous on for auditions is asking the program directors and department heads for letters. And that's what I did. And I think that also helped me. So I asked the department head of the program I'm going to write me a letter, and he said he would. So I ended up getting some pretty high ranking senior people, right? Not just in the military, but I'm saying he's the department head of the department. So that was a pretty big deal. And just the fact that he was willing to write it, I think helped me a lot as well, that someone that high up was willing to back me. So I would say as you're on your auditions, just don't be afraid to ask them. They get asked all the time, and just kind of ask these people hey, look, we worked together. We were in the OR a lot, or we were in clinic a lot together. Would you be willing to write me a letter? You know how I work. Can you just express that? And I think that your letter would really do me a lot of good. And most of them will have a great response to that. So
I totally agree, because they've gone through the process. It's not this is something new that you're approaching them with. And if I may say, I got one letter from an academic pathologist after rotating with him just, for a week, so he barely knew me. We talked
Yeah.
like a handful of times and that was it. But just approaching them and asking for a letter is almost expected. And even though that was really nerve-wracking to do, and it was harder to get a letter from someone that didn't really know you compared to others who knew you throughout a month or so, I feel like that letter went and went the extra mile to help me get some interviews and stuff. So
Yeah, definitely.
and it sounds like that helped you too.
Yeah.
So you get your application done, and so since you are doing ERAS as well, timeline wise, it's about June, July or so that you're filling this out. But as I'm kind of gathering, everything happens earlier in the military. And so when are you interviewing at programs?
Yeah. So in the military, the application opened, I think July 1st. So July 1st of fourth year, right at the beginning. Anyway, that I just wanted to say that. But interviews happen as a part of your audition rotation. So because there are so few programs, they just interview you right there. So it's almost an expectation that while you're on your audition, you will interview at some point. And the first couple days while you're there, they say, hey, yeah, look, we're going to do interviews on your last Friday, or we're going to do interview on your third Friday, or whatever. They just let you know. And so you have at least a couple weeks to prepare, and so you can get all ready for that. And then you just, like, usually it was really informal, like my first interview again. So at the program I'm going to, that actually it was very formal. Like I was in the program conference room, and I was with the program director, assistant program director, 3 different staff members, and then one of the chief residents was all in my interview. And they all sat me down and they went around the table and each asked me one question, and it was very like regimented and very formal. But the next program I went to in San Diego, they were like, it was not formal. It was the program director, and in the military they have these things called specialty leaders. So this guy was in charge of all of the ENTs in the Navy. So it was those 2 guys, and we just sat down in the cafeteria one day, like we're all in scrubs and we're just like
Nice.
eating lunch, and they interviewed me over the table.
Yeah.
And then the third program was like, the program director just like called me into his office at one point, and we just talked, and that was it. So it varies from program to program. And I think in the military, especially, the interviews are very informal because you're there for a whole month. And so they kind of roll it all in together, and you're almost interviewing for an entire month while you're there.
And so you did these audition / interviews for the military. Did you do some interviews with civilian programs as well?
I didn't, because for me, I was really set on doing a military program. So yeah, I filled out some things on ERAS. I did the bare minimum, and I put a couple programs there just so I had something, but I was really not intending to go civilian. And I found out that I matched in December, so
Right.
it was like, I kind of just waited, and I was feeling out the programs, this military programs, and I kind of had the feeling that I would, at least match something in the military. So I was like, it's good. And so I kind of let my ERAS fizzle out because I just found out so early, by December, I mean, a lot of civilians are still interviewing and have interviews through January. So I don't know. I still felt like I had time to set those up if I needed to. But again, after I finished all my auditions, I was like, what? I feel like I'm in a semi-good spot. I'm just going to roll the dice, essentially, which worked out in my favor. But, looking back, maybe I should have had more of my bases covered. But
hey,
yeah,
it all worked out.
Yeah.
Could you touch on perhaps, a listener who is interested in ENT but is going down the civilian route, maybe help them kind of gauge how many programs they should apply to and interview at in order to have the greatest chance of success?
I mean, my advice is just do as many as you can. So what that means is as many as you have time for, right? So do as many auditions as you can fit in as your school will allow you to do. Same thing with interviews, just do as many as you can get to. And obviously there's financial things that go into that, right? How many times you can afford to go on an audition, or how many times you can afford to go on an interview, how many applications you can send out, because there's fees associated with all of that. So But all of that said, again, I would just sit down and look at your options and just go to as many as possible. So again, just to touch on one of my experiences. So I've kind of been telling an untruth for simplicity's reasons. So there are really only two programs that accept Navy ENT interns. The third program that I went to is actually an Air Force and Army program that's at a Navy hospital. So it's kind of weird, but anyway, I knew there were Navy physicians who were working in the ENT program at this third hospital. It's Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. So even though I knew I couldn't get accepted there, I still went there because I knew that I could show a good face and that the people would talk, right? That the staff from Walter Reed would talk to the program at Portsmouth in Virginia and in San Diego, and that would increase my chances. And I really think that helped me a lot. I think at the end, I asked a few of the staff at Walter Reed to make phone calls for me to the program director at Portsmouth and say, hey, look, you're really going to want this guy. He's going to be a good worker for you, all those kinds of things. So anyway, I just say that to illustrate my point of just go as many as you can. I know for a fact that I am the only Navy ENT applicant who went to Walter Reed for an audition rotation. And I think that really set me apart because no one else even bothered to do it. So if you can show you're willing to do that, if you can show, hey, look, I'm going to all the programs. My entire fourth year was ENT because that's what I want to do. I just want this so bad. I'm going to go to all the programs. I'm going to show my face. I'm going to go to places that maybe my chances aren't as good, or it's even impossible for me to go here. I'm just going to go and show up and do the work. And that, I think, goes a long way.
That's really cool. Finding a unique way to go the extra mile and to show your face and to make those contacts, because that's what everyone says about every specialty. It's so small. The world is small. People talk, especially among program directors. And so any way that you can show your face and make those connections as you did, I think definitely bears fruit and helps people get where they want to go. That's awesome.
And I'm glad you brought up that the program directors talk, because I think it's important for students to recognize that programs want students as bad as we want programs, if that makes sense, right? They might not necessarily want you specifically, but they want someone who's going to fill their spot. And so that you have to understand that they're looking for who's going to fill their spot too. So that's why they talk. They're like, hey, did you have this guy come? Did you have Phil come to your pathology program? He was great. Are you going to take him? Because we kind of want him. They do that a lot more than I think we realize. And so I go into the auditions with your eyes wide open, knowing that they're trying to audition for you as much as we're auditioning for them.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely goes both ways. So let me ask you this then. I mean, since your options were somewhat limited, I still feel like there's definitely a big difference from moving to Virginia versus San Diego, right? I mean, location's a big factor when you're ranking different programs, and you definitely have a lot more if you're doing civilian. But what factors did you take into account when you were choosing where you wanted to go, and how you're going to rank programs after you interviewed?
So the first big thing was location, definitely. And probably some of you listeners are thinking well, why did you choose Virginia over San Diego then? The reason is my in-laws actually live about an hour away from the hospital in Virginia. So thinking about me, I have two small children. You probably can hear them in the background screaming a little bit. So I was thinking, that's going to be a lot easier for my wife if we're there close to family in Virginia rather than in San Diego, thousands of miles away from the closest known relative, basically. So that was a really big factor. But then secondly, on location, I just liked Virginia better than San Diego. San Diego's kind of felt like a desert to me. I mean, they both have oceans, but I liked the trees in Virginia, so that was a plus there. But then perhaps more applicable to medicine, I looked at how I got along with the residents personally. How did I fit in with them, as they're sizing me out for how they fit in with me. So then the second thing I looked at is the quality of the residents. And so I tried to look at who had the best skills as far as the residents go. And so another thing I looked at was quality of facilities. Is this falling apart? Do the instruments work? Are the instruments constantly broken? Like, what are the support staff like? Are the scrub techs good? Are the nursing staff good at these places? I guess the advice to you to the listeners looking into programs is just like listen to your gut with those things that kind of weird you out, and you're like, you know what, I don't really like that, because if it bothers you after a month, it's probably going to bother you after 3, 4, 5 years. So look at that. Look at how the residents are, because the residents are going to be different, because you're going to be spending 80 hours a week with these people for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So make sure you like them. Make sure it's good for your family, your lifestyle, all of the above. So
cool. Awesome. That's very comprehensive, and I think that helps people who want to go into ENT as well as any specialty. I think just being able to go and get as much time at different places, I think, whether that's with an audition, a second look after an interview, do whatever you can to talking to the residents before or after an interview, through email or chat. Anything that you can expose yourself to certain programs will help you get that gut feeling and rank appropriately. Awesome. So we've talked a lot about the whole process, and we're coming at the end of this interview. Cam, do you have any last pieces of advice that you would give someone who is similar to your position, and as this podcast, focuses on DOs? What would you tell another DO student who wants to do ENT, maybe with or without the military? Any final pieces of advice that you would give them as they start their 4th year and start to apply for residency?
My advice is to just go for it. A lot of students get intimidated away from doing a competitive specialty because they're like, well, what if I don't match?
Mm-hmm.
What if I have to scramble? Another one of our classmates who I am certain has a higher class rank than I do, and I'm fairly certain he did better on the boards than me. He applied for ENT and civilian, and he didn't match. But the reason I say is he scrambled into a great general surgery program, and he's still going to be able to pursue a career in otolaryngology because he can do an intern year in general surgery, and then there's a lot of crossover, and he can still get his foot in the door at another program. So I say that because like his scores were better than mine, and yet I matched and he didn't. So the reason I say that is like it's just a crapshoot, basically. Do the best you can, and if you try your best, put your best foot forward, go to all the programs, audition, do all the things we've been talking about, and you still might not match, or you might. So my advice, I guess, not to try to be discouraging with the story, is just like, you never know what a program is going to like about you. Mm-hmm. If your scores are good enough to like meet minimums and you get an interview, that's really all that matters, because once you have that interview, board scores almost don't matter anymore. Your class rank doesn't really matter anymore. All of these things that we push so hard 1st, 2nd, 3rd year, they go out the window on that day. Mm-hmm. And so you just never know. Like, maybe you barely make the cut and they're like, you know what, but I really like that this guy did this random trip to Africa and he was, helping do ear tubes for these children in Africa or whatever. They're going to just be like, hey, that was really cool. Or maybe they're like, I like that you worked at a bakery your whole life. You're going to be good with your hands. You're going to have strong hands to work in the operating, or like, who knows? So that's why I say my advice is like, if you're nervous or you feel like you're on the fence, just go for it. Because the worst that's going to happen is you're going to scramble, but you're still going to get something. Mm-hmm. You're not going to just like wind up working at McDonald's after your 4th year of med school because you didn't match an ENT. That's not how it happens. So my advice to you, if you're thinking about it, just go for it. Do your best, work hard, and you never know what's going to happen. So just do it.
And that was Cameron Lindemann, a newly minted DO with the Navy, serving in Virginia with ENT as a specialty. I hope you enjoyed that episode and added some perspective to what it's like being a 4th year DO student, getting into residency and all the nuances that are involved. I feel like sometimes we find ourselves in the dark on how to proceed, especially in this year, and especially to those students out there who might feel like they don't have enough guidance from their peers or sources or what have you. I hope this helps and helps you figure out how you're going to take your next steps in your fourth year. And if you're interested in ENT, I hope that this was a beneficial episode to help you kind of know what to do in order to get your get into the specialty. If you'd like to reach out to me with any suggestions or feedback for the episode, for the podcast, you can do so at theosteopod@gmail.com, or you can reach out at Twitter at theosteopod. And feel free to like the podcast, subscribe to it, do whatever you need to do to spread the word so more of your colleagues and friends can learn about the process and be more prepared just like you are. So with that, I will catch you on the next episode. Thank you.